Hi, welcome back to another session of Peaceful Passages with myself, Theresa Bates, and Sierra Onstad.
Hello.
We've been really, I just want to say at the beginning, we've been really enjoying the time here at GLC, and very thankful for the staff here and everything that they're doing.
They've been wonderful.
Yeah, they've been absolutely wonderful. And thank you all for supporting them and for supporting people like us that have the opportunity to come in and share what God's put on our heart to talk to you guys. But I wanted to mention there's a book that Sierra had brought to my attention, and I neglected to mention it last week, and it's such a good book, I wanted her to talk about it in the beginning of this particular episode.
So the title of it is Reimagining Death, Stories and Practical Wisdom for Home Funerals and Green Burials by Lucinda Herring. And it's just a really great resource to be able to see what other people have done and just hear the stories. And it's very relatable and really emotional and just a really good way to really introduce the concept of home funerals and different ways people do things.
So basically the story is many different stories that people would call in or write to the author to say, this is my experience with when we took care of our loved one in the home.
Precisely, yes.
And so that way, I think a book like this is important because it helps take some of the fear out, but also it gives us different creative ways to be able to take care of our loved one in our homes.
Exactly.
And to think of different ways to go, because there was a book like this that somebody had mentioned before that I was reading, and when they were doing their home funeral and home burial, they went ahead, and that's where I learned about decorating the casket and things like that, and putting love notes and stuff in it. There's a lot more creative ways out there.
There definitely is.
Right, and thank you for mentioning that because it is a very important book to have as a resource. But in today's episode, what I want to talk about is I want to talk about some of the different interment options that are out there. There's a few that in our society, it tells our society wants us to know that there's only two ways, either going to cremate or burial. That's it. There's no other options. But
there's so much more, and even within those two realms, there's so many more within that.
Right. So what I want to do is I want to cover briefly what a basic burial is and basic cremation. But then let you know there's a couple different new options that are coming out there. So about some of the ground burials, which is we're most familiar with.
Yeah, it's the
do you
most
have
typical.
do you have a little bit of things you'd like to be able to share with that?
Well, it's the most normal practice that people choose. Certainly not the only option, but it's a great option if people wish to do that. So typically, you go to a funeral home, you'll be embalmed if you do a viewing or not, depending on your preference, and then you'll be casketed and then taken out to a graveyard, and usually there'll be a liner and there'll be like all of this extra stuff, and it can be quite expensive, unfortunately. But there are more natural options when it comes to that.
Okay.
And so, for instance, there are green burials. So with that, instead of being in a big old casket, you could be put in just a simple burial shroud, which could be decorated or however you want, and it naturally decomposes. Or you can be placed in a coffin that is made out of wicker. It's like a basket. There's also cardboard options, which are a lot less expensive. And I know it sounds kind of odd that you would want it out of cardboard, but it, decomposes a lot faster and it goes back to the earth a lot faster.
Right. They're the cardboard boxes that you mentioned. They're specifically made for people.
Exactly.
It's not like a box that you can get it like a Walmart
exactly.
or
They're
something
specifically
like that.
made for this purpose.
But they're sometimes the funeral homes readily have those on hand because they're your basic inexpensive cremation container.
Correct.
And they will have those. And sometimes if you want a green burial, and a green burial basically is everything that goes in the ground is biodegradable.
Correct, yes. Nothing remains afterwards.
Right. And some of the cemeteries, if it's important to you to have a green burial, check around if you have the time available to be able to do that, to find the cemetery that has the green burial as an option. But you can use the cardboard box or the cremation container to do that as an option.
It's a great
Also,
alternative.
right. So with ground burial, some of the things that people choose is location. My
Correct.
family's been buried there. Our family for history. I know my a friend of mine's family has like 7 generations
Wow.
buried in California.
It's beautiful.
And so, choose location, but it's also with interment options, try to keep in mind where, again, location. Because a lot of times we tend to die where we live, but sometimes that's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
Or if you want to be buried in a different state or a different country, there's all rules, regulations. So if that's something that you want to do, so maybe right now where we're filming is I live in Texas, but for whatever reason, or I have a friend of mine. I will use this as an example. I have a friend of mine whose mother is here in Texas. But their option is when she passes away, she wants to be buried in her family cemetery in New York.
So that's very far
Right.
transportation.
It is,
It's
there
gonna
is a lot of
cost, yeah.
transportation. You don't have to be embalmed to go state to state. There are things to go to walk with the funeral home around that. And talk with the funeral home, but you have to contract with the funeral home if you're going from state to state, because the deceased has to be taken care of by
Properly.
the funeral home in the location where you're at, and then there's extra shipping charges to get from point A to point B. Then there's another funeral home that you'll have to take contact from that point to go to the cemetery where you're at.
Makes
There's a
complete
little bit
sense.
more footwork, but they do it all the time. And so location.
Exactly.
So that's one of the things. The other thing I'd like you to talk about a little bit, 'cause Sierra has so much information on all these different topics, but I want to talk just a little bit about cremation, because it is a little bit easier to transport cremains
Exactly.
than it is with a full body.
It's a lot less weight. It's a smaller
Right.
container and all of that jazz. And so,
Right.
yeah, and with cremation, people may not be familiar with the process. I don't know if you want to go over that real quick for people who don't understand what happens.
The
with-
process of cremation? Well, there's direct cremation. So what that technically means is where the deceased is at, they will take them from there right to the cremation, or crematory is what they're called, and the whole cremation process will happen. You're put into what is called a retort, and that process takes about an hour and a half to 3 hours, depending on the size of the deceased. And that you have to have your burial certificate, and there's no police investigation going on, anything
Yeah.
like that, because once a cremation happens, it's permanent.
Correct, yeah.
Which is different compared to burial, because burial, if
People can be
there's
exhumed
right, you can
if
be
necessary.
exhumed and taken back up, and because sometimes things like that do happen. But once the process of the cremation happens, then what you get back is they have different creative ways to return the cremains to you. You can either have them put in a box or in urns. Sometimes they have
cetera.
jewelry made, different
And
things like that.
With that, then you wonder, okay, like then what do I do with these cremains? And so there are several different options that you can choose from. Either like if you want, your traditional urn, like on your mantelpiece, that works too. But like you said, like they can take those cremains and turn them into glass, which can be then turned into jewelry. Or even there's a process where they will take it and they will pressurize it. And those cremains can be turned into diamonds and different kinds of gemstones that can be placed into memorial jewelry. or even taken and spread into resin and turned into a record where you can have like a vinyl record, or you can have your loved one's voice or messages put on there, or even their favorite music and that kind of thing. Like there are so many creative ways. Like you can be, it can be turned into paint, and someone can paint a beautiful portrait of your family member. It's just so many. There's even this really cool new thing where they will take it and they'll turn it almost into like a concrete substance, and they'll use that as a structure that will be placed at the bottom of the ocean to then create life as a coral reef. And so people can go down and swim and scuba dive and visit your memorial reef.
Right. But we are all learning something new today.
There's so many options.
Right. Well, that's one of the things that I like about what we're learning in today's modern times is there's a lot of different ways to be able to memorialize your loved ones. But I should have stated this at the beginning. This is one of those episodes that you might not agree with everything that we're sharing, but there's so much information that
it's good to know what your options are, so then you can make that decision for yourself.
Right.
And then also being respectful of others and what they choose. Yeah, you may not agree with cremation, and you would prefer burial, but you should also be respectful of other people's choices and also provide and support that. So whether that's through legislation, whether it is for like water cremation or other different options that seem a little new and strange, you may not want it, but you are giving the opportunity to others who would want that.
Right. And we'll be talking about those in just a few minutes. But if you were mentioning about making jewelry, generally jewelry is made with the cremated remains. And I want to go ahead and bring a little bit of clarity with the cremation process itself. So after a cremation happens, the technical term that the term that a lot of people are most familiar with is, here is your loved one's ashes. And ashes is
not quite
is a nice way to say it's your loved one, but what you're actually getting is cremated remains, which are actually bone fragments. And the reason why I wanted to mention that is, from what I saw in Scripture, what we talked about a couple sessions ago, is a lot of the precedent is to bury.
Which that is also an option.
Right. But with the cremains and the thought of ashes, people think ashes dissolve very quickly.
They don't. They do not decompose.
And cremated remains, they're technically they're bone fragments, and bone fragments don't decompose. So when you spread ashes,
they're there.
They're there. They stay on the surface, and sometimes it takes a while for that process, for that bone fragment to wiggle its way back, well, break down, but also wiggle its way underneath the soil.
Correct. Yeah.
So, from what I'm understanding is to be able to, you can take the ashes and bury.
You can, and there's options with that too, with biodegradable urns and that sort of thing, or even mixing it into soil so that it can be nutritious for plant life and that sort of thing.
Right. But it also, what you can do with the cremated remains really varies from state to state.
It definitely does.
And when you pick up the cremated remains from the funeral home or the place that has done the cremation, ask legally what is allowed in your state.
Correct.
And because there's some states that you can bury in your backyard, but you can't bury it anywhere else, where there's a funeral director. Or
spreading it on public land, like you can't spread ashes in national parks or in the ocean, technically.
Right, you're not supposed to. And sometimes people think they can get away with things,
No,
but
they can get you.
There's ways, modern ways that they can still find you. But one of the other things, and forgive me, I can't remember the technical name, but they have monuments now at different cemeteries that have places to inter your loved one, and they look like monuments that are maybe 6 to 8 feet tall. Most of them now are made out of either wood or marble, and they have spots
They're
that you
kind of
can
like
put 'em-
mausoleums, and they're like little shells where you can place the
Right.
cremated remains in an urn.
Right. So there's those options. So that's coming up. So we've covered a lot of cremation and burial, and those are most of the mostly wide-known topics of different ways to inter people. But what I want Sierra to kind of run with, because that's the blessing of youth, she has so much more ability to get in depth, and I've learned so much from her that I'd like her to be able to go ahead and talk about some of the different burial options that are out there.
So some other remains dispersion options that aren't just burial and cremation, because we've discussed, like, yes, you have those, and then there's even more within those. But what if you want something completely different? Like, there are other options. So for one, there's alkaline hydrolysis or water cremation. And so that is still cremation, but the process is different. And I'm sure you could go into more of the technical aspect of that. And then there's also, let me think of the word here. I just wrote it down. One moment.
Well, let's stay on the alkaline hydrolysis just briefly, because the other topic I know that you're going to touch on, to me, I think is fascinating.
Yes.
So the alkaline hydrolysis, what that process is basically you're put in a large tub with water, but also has a lot of alkaline in it.
About 95% water.
Or in lye. And what that does is, instead of fire cremating the body, the alkaline is like a bath, and it decomposes the body, and it takes about an hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes 3, again, depending on the size of the deceased. But then afterwards, you still get the bones back. You still get the cremated remains back. And the thing I kind of find fascinating and intriguing about that particular process is the color of the bone is a little bit lighter, because you don't have
the fire,
the fire charring the bone. And I think that's fascinating. But the process itself, when they're done, the water basically just goes down to the drain.
And it's completely sanitized. It's not going to cause any issues or disease or anything. People get kind of scared about that, which it's neutral, it's clean.
And some of the history, one of the new things that I learned last week, and I apologize for not writing that down, but people that have water tested and have tried to test for the extra alkaline and the things like that that go into our water because of water cremation or alkaline hydrolysis, and there is no residue with that whatsoever. What they do find is more of pharmaceuticals,
other stuff that we're throwing in the water.
Right. Well, not just the water. It's just the things that we do. You know, medications and things like that. But that's a totally different topic there. But this next topic, I want you to go ahead and cover a little bit more in detail, because it's one of the newer ways. Backtracking a little bit about the alkaline hydrolysis, that actually has been around for a lot more years than I thought. I thought it was just a new process
in
the last 4 or 5 years, but actually it goes back 10 to 20, if not more.
Exactly.
And the alkaline hydrolysis is available in several different states.
About 20 different states currently.
And if this option, or the option that you're talking about, is something that you want to choose,
you'll have to transport.
You have the ability, if you want to do that, to go from the state where you're at, and then to be transported to the state that offers this. And it's just more of footwork and legwork on phone calls and making it happen.
A lot more arrangements, but if that's what you want, it's worth it.
Right. And the funeral homes are very well versed in transportation and things like that. And a lot of the funeral homes and the funeral directors want to honor with what the family wants. So if you want to be transported here or to a different state, they will absolutely help that be able to process.
They're there to facilitate whatever you need done.
Okay. So I will be quiet, and I will let you talk about this next subject, because I am absolutely fascinated about it. So what is this new process?
It's a very interesting process.
How do we know it as?
Unfortunately, there are some negative connotations with one of the labels given to it, which is human composting, which I know sounds like, whoa, you know.
I know it sounds bad.
It sounds bad, but really it's just a sped up process of the natural decomposition process. Instead of it taking, you know, years for your body to decompose naturally in a grave site, this takes far less time, only about 30 days. And so what's really amazing with this is for those who prefer more natural or ecologically friendly options, this one is up there. Like, it is really, really cool. So what happens is you will not be embalmed. You'll be placed into a specially made container where it will be lined with natural materials such as like straw and sawdust and that kind of thing. And people can come and decorate the container, prayers, normal ceremonies, rituals, all of that jazz. And then you will be covered in more natural material, and the container will be enclosed, and then that reduction process will happen. And at the end of that process, after 30 days, you're left with neutral soil that doesn't have any smell to it. It doesn't have any weird things in it. There's no disease. You're just gone back to the earth. You're completely turned back into soil. And the amount of that is about 200 pounds, depending on the size of the person. It's a lot of soil.
It's a lot of soil.
But what's amazing with that is that you can take that home, put that in your garden. You can put that in plants if you want to do a memorial garden and have that soil be the life that grows those plants. That's amazing. You can also take it to special sites that are restricted, that there will be no human development on that land, where it will never, there'll never be any buildings built, nothing, anything.
Kind of like a designated natural state park kind of thing.
Exactly. And so then there's usually forests or different natural elements and stuff like that. And then your family can come and visit that park or that designated site and see that, like, you know, all the amazing life that's growing out from the soil that was their loved one. And I don't know, it's just a really cool thing. And if you're curious about it, there are amazing videos on YouTube. Ask a Mortician has a really good in-depth, about half-hour episode that is, I believe, called, let's see here, Let's Visit a Human Composting Facility, and also Refinery 29 has one that interviews two ladies who work at a human composting facility, and they go through the process and explain pricing and transportation issues and just the amazing, beautiful process that it is.
Right, because the concept about the mortician is Caitlin Doty, and she's been around a long time, and she is a wealth of information.
She is the queen of death positivity.
She's one of the forerunners of getting information like this out there, going to the legislators, not just in the state that she lives in, but also to Washington, D.C., and legislating on behalf of having other options for people to embrace or to have to do.
Exactly. And she also educates the public in a very engaging, entertaining way.
She's very entertaining. Yes.
So it makes it easier.
Right. But also with the process of natural organic reduction, it's not like we would take somebody out and just compost. It's done in a very honoring and respectful way. And that process is one of the videos that I saw about that particular process is they have each container in a larger wheel container, and it slowly rotates. So that way the people, the body slowly turns. So there's not a lot of human contact. And with the soil that you get back, there's no remains in it.
Correct.
There's no flesh. There's no bones. There's
just
nothing.
Beautiful, rich soil.
And that person is returned back to dust and soil like God originally intended. Right.
Exactly.
Right. And it's fascinating because one of the beauties is, with all the scientific minds that are out there and different ways of doing it, I like this particular option because you're going back on how God originally designed you, and I think it's just a beautiful option.
Truly.
But again, there's sometimes when with what I believe, what I want done,
Mm-hmm.
is that's my particular choice.
Yeah.
But what you want done, it's about honoring each other,
Mm-hmm.
and the option that you choose, I might not agree with, but
Yeah.
my love and my honor for you to do what you ask, to respectfully do what you ask,
Mm-hmm.
that is loving your brother, loving your sister, loving
Exactly.
your parent. And, you know, and sometimes in life, we do the best we can. We try to give as much honor as
Mm-hmm.
possible. So whatever option that your loved one might choose,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if you don't like their option, have that conversation sooner than later.
Exactly.
And because maybe there's a reason why they're choosing the option.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend of mine that all of their life they've been against cremation. So when her son tragically died, and I had found out that she had him cremated,
Mm-hmm.
and she knows I tell the story. She gave me permission, but when I first heard, I'm like, oh my, you did.
You did what? Yeah.
Oh,
Like, why did you do that?
okay.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I can't necessarily get mad about it.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little taken back,
Yeah.
but and her thought, the reason why she did it, which instead of criticizing, condemning, judging, letting her go, is, can I ask why?
Yeah. Have that conversation.
Right, and have that conversation. Respect her enough to ask that particular question.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I asked her that question, they knew, her and her husband knew, in a short period of time, they were going to move from the state where they were in
Mm-hmm.
and move to a different state. They wanted their son to come with them. And
it's a great
when
reason.
she told me that, I'm like, ah,
Makes sense.
that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a whole lot of sense. So, and it's hard because we have to take the time, be willing to take the time,
Be open. Yeah.
and ask questions that sometimes are uncomfortable to ask, but are so much needed. Because I would rather risk
Mm-hmm.
not making you mad, because a lot of it is just asking the right kind of
Right
question.
kind of questions, and it may be awkward, which is
Right.
okay.
Right, but
Yeah.
it's just like, can I ask why you made that particular decision?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, this is the reason why. And loving your family, loving your friends enough to ask them those particular questions, because we're all doing the best we can, and we want peace and respect for each person when they pass away,
Precisely.
and to love and honor them. And that's what we're about, is honoring and making these passages that we were walking through a little bit more peaceful. And there's so much more, you know, options that keep coming in again and again, you know, in life. And there's always new ways
There are indeed.
to let people know, but also, you know, with what God is leading each one of us to do. So I want to thank you all again today for joining Sarah and myself, Peaceful Passages, on this particular episode. Thank you, GLC, for all you're doing, and we will see you again next week.